Hi, everyone. It's Maria, and welcome to the Breaking Up with Toxicity podcast. Thank you for being with me today. Each week, I will connect with people as they share relatable life experiences. We will talk about and at times challenge reoccurring unhealthy and toxic patterns that keep you from the changes you want to see as you break these unhealthy cycles. So let's get started and see where this show will take us today. Be sure to listen and don't forget to follow so that you never miss an episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Today we'll be talking with Diana and Leana, and we're going to go back in time. We're going to reflect on what it was like growing up Albanian, the challenges, the struggles with having very traditional values and customs, and what were the challenges for you?
Diana, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think some of the things when I kind of go back in time and think about, I'm not sure if struggle is too harsh of a term, but I guess we could use struggle, but thinking about relationships and seeing how I was raised along with my family, of course, right? Um, re- Relying on relationships with cousins and family and not really expanding those relationships to anyone outside of family for a good deal of time, and really being told you trust family's thicker, blood is thicker than water,
Mm-hmm.
and really seeing how that impacted the scope and the breadth of like the people that we interacted with. We had a friend group at school, and we came home and we didn't see those friends, until we went back to school.
That's
There
right.
wasn't, hanging out after. There was none of that, which is really interesting, especially when you start comparing it to the upbringing of our children today.
Oh, it's very different. Let me ask you something. So you're one of five, correct?
Yes.
Was it allowed with your other siblings, like which each sibling was more like of the culture broken or evolving or changing?
Absolutely, absolutely. I definitely think, my eldest sister, definitely, I mean, she left the house at an early age. She was married at an early age. But even prior to her being married, there were certain rules and restrictions in place. And then, progressively, my parents eased up, and I'm the youngest of the daughters. So I attended prom, and
Oh,
they,
lucky you.
yeah. Yeah, I attended prom with my current husband, who I wasn't engaged to at the time, which that's a whole other podcast. But I think just seeing how little they were allowed to do, and I thought, oh my gosh, I was allowed to do so much, but the reality is it wasn't that huge of a change, but there definitely was progress, along the way, of course.
Right. It was very difficult, especially for firstborns, because most often firstborns are parentified. And then when on top of it, coming from a very traditional culture, and then um, the parents, most of that generation had just been in this country. We're talking back in the 70s for a very short period of time. So they really were a close-knit community and didn't know how to step out into a different environment.
I agree.
Yeah. Being first generation, I think, and coming from such a huge family. So there are some individuals that, come from smaller families, but I have somewhere's up around like 30 some odd first cousins, right? So my parents, opinion was you don't need friends, you have cousins.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
friends? No, 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 no.
Yeah.
You can't trust them. No, 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 no. No, nope, nope.
Yeah. I think we were all told the same thing. Yeah, for sure.
Lena, you're one of
4.
four, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
How is it like in your home?
I don't know.
So
My siblings. I'm just going to jump in. My sisters are, um, we're all like about 2 years apart from each other. So I'm 6 years. There's 6 years age difference, 6 year age difference between myself and my eldest sister, and my brother is just a year younger than me. So the one part of it was the fact that we're first generation and we had all these traditions, and the other part of it is that we were women being raised in this traditional environment, because what I will tell you, held true for me didn't always hold true for my brother, right? So I think
Right.
there's that other element as well.
Exactly. That's where I was gonna go. I'm one of four. My brother is the oldest. One of my sisters is 7 years older. One is 6 years younger. Five actually. So I'm the middle. So my brother, it was the oldest, but like you said, Diana, rules don't apply to the male, right?
Yeah.
Because they were able to do pretty much whatever they wanted to do. But then when it came to the females, it was, a strict environment. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you couldn't go out. You came home from school, you did your chores, did your homework, and that was pretty much it until you went back to school the next day and saw your friends. But my brother was the total opposite, was able to do whatever. However, my oldest was like a mother figure to us because she's a little older. So she was kind of in charge of the two younger sisters because my parents worked hard. Um, so for her, I want to say it was probably the hardest. And then I came along and it was a little easier because as the years went on, obviously things changed. But then again, did not go to the prom either. I actually wasn't allowed to do any of that stuff. But as the years went on, and lucky for my younger sister, she had two older sisters that, went through a lot and were kind of fighting for her to be able to do more things than we were able to do because my parents didn't know any better. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like they grew up a
Well, they knew
certain
what they
way.
knew. They knew exactly
Exactly.
what they knew.
Exactly. They knew what they knew and they thought that that was the right way of doing and handling things. And luckily for my younger sister, she had, older siblings. Well, she's very successful, went to college, you know what I mean, has a great job. And it was due to us being able to like push our parents to say, you know what, she needs to go to school, she needs to graduate, she needs to do these things. Because for us it was, you graduate high school, you're supposed to be getting married, and that's how it was back then. It's very different these days, and it's
Oh,
very different. Like us raising our children, like Diana said, is a completely different ball game. Some traditions we had were amazing and they were great, and I still think they're amazing, but some of them were a little too hard. But we've been through it, we lived it, and we were fine with it.
because you only know what you know. And sometimes, people, ignorance is a bliss. And then sometimes, like, well, you're making excuses. No. How do you fault someone for only knowing what they know?
No,
And
exactly.
people assuming that people have resources and support and education. Back then, at that time, we did not have that.
Oh
But at the
no.
same
We
time,
did not have that.
if you take a step back and see how like our families migrated over, and Lena, you migrated over as well. You were born in
So I
where?
was born here, but
Oh,
when
yeah.
I was 6 months old when I moved back home, and I pretty much grew up there and came back when I was 13.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I was thinking that you were born over there abroad. But I guess, I mean, when you think about it, when they came over, I mean, it's so impressive that they came with nothing, right?
Hmm.
They came with, in some situations, their shirt on their back, and
Right.
they supported one another coming over, right? I mean, that's something that, we could most certainly applaud. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And they
Absolutely.
and they really wanted to stick together as we were all growing up, attending mass. We would, after church, we would go from house to house and friends and cousins. And I mean, it's an amazing thing for our families, and for us, we got to know so many other Albanians, which is it's really, something that I don't think I really appreciated at the time, because it was like, oh, come on, like, why can't we just go home and
Back then, right,
yeah,
Right, right, right.
Exactly. And you think about like how they built up businesses and how they borrowed money from one another and bought buildings and, financed, one another's businesses and, all without even going to the bank, without even knowing how to read and write English. I mean, it's such an impressive thing when you look back at it. And I feel like we've gained a lot of that ethic, like that work ethic, in the things that we've done and the way that we apply ourselves in every day. But I do wish that there are certain things that would have been slightly different. I do wish that church would have been more of a place to really go and pray and to learn about your religion versus having seen it as we saw it as a meat market growing up.
I would. You took the words right
You
out of my.
went dressed up. It
Oh, it was
was
like you
just
were
if you
going to a wedding,
to a
like
wedding.
dolled up head to toe. Yep.
And then you would know when a girl was ready for marriage, right?
I
We didn't
know.
have like a debutante ball or anything like that. It's like you're going to church now. We're going to bring you to funerals. That's how you're going to be seen to
I
society.
know.
Just like wild. So then
I
all of a
know.
sudden you didn't want to go to church
No.
necessarily because of that.
Someone's gonna come over. You were afraid after you left that someone will be at the door waiting to come and ask for your hand in
Yeah,
marriage, or ask your parents actually, not even you.
exactly. You need to start practicing, bringing over the coffees
The
and stuff.
coffee.
So it's like, I'm not ready for church. Don't ask me to go.
I mean, we've evolved. It's wonderful. I mean, I grew up at the same time as both of you, and I'm one of three. I'm the oldest. I
Hmm.
do have to say, my parents actually treated me equally. I have two brothers. So I didn't go out. They didn't go out either. I
Oh
cleaned.
wow.
Oh yes, that's where my parents were so like, it's like, wow, how did they learn that? How did they know that? Because most people, it was not like that. So
Yeah.
my parents really did treat us equally. Now, once I got married, then my brothers, they were still in high school. They could do whatever they wanted. That was like free reign now. But I remember my dad buying my first car, and I was 17 years old, 16 going on 17. I was so nervous to drive that car. He bought it for me. I worked for him down in the Bronx. And I didn't even want to drive because I was afraid that if somebody saw me, they would be like, "Oh, look at her, young girl out." Because you know how back then that really wasn't appropriate to do.
Right.
You went to school and you
Even though
went
you were
home.
doing nothing
I was doing
wrong
nothing wrong.
to go help your father's business, right? But if they would have seen you somewhere, they would assume something different, and that's how the rumors started. And
That's
that's
right.
what I didn't like about back in the day.
No,
Yeah.
but that's so unhealthy. They only knew what they knew, and what mattered so much to them, I mean, was number one was is it, it still is today, was their family. But the other that was, I would say, demise of so many relationships and the conflict and the disagreements was worrying so much about what other people thought.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was so
Absolutely.
profound. It really, when you look at it later in life, like where we are now, it's like can't even imagine how one worked. How did we really work through that? Living like that for so many years.
Right.
I
It
mean,
was
that's what social media is doing to our kids now, and I mean, even to some people, at our age, like that's kind of that impact. I mean, we grew up with it, and we saw it firsthand before social media, and the constant comparison, the constant, you know, trying to keep up with the Joneses, and
Hmm.
and really, you know, always thinking you're not doing good enough
That's
because
right.
you're being compared to so many others, and having to perform your best, and oh, I want them to talk about how great the family is, and you're like, but why don't we just focus on having a good time? Or, uh,
Being good, exactly. No, it is true that that pressure that was put on all of us of appearance, it was extreme.
yeah, for sure.
It was extreme. Presentation was very big. And no matter at that time, when you spoke about people, you spoke about what they had, where they lived, and how they dressed.
Yeah.
but you never
And what
really knew
car
the
they drive.
person.
It's true.
But you learn
But we've
what
come a long way.
absolutely, and we continue to do so. And one thing as a therapist is if I knew what I knew back then to
Oh.
help myself to better understand me and then understand other people better, because the way that we grew up and not having that knowledge, or I'm not even going to talk about support, but just the knowledge and the information of mental health. Because now, as an adult, or actually, when I decided to go back to school and get into the mental health field, is when my father passed away. Because it was like everything just shattered, everything fell apart. And then I fell apart because I didn't understand who I was. Why was I feeling this? And I just started to touch on things that I really never touched on before.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing what I know today, and it's not a fault for anyone, because as I'll say it again, we only know what we know. It's unfortunate and it's sad, but if more people had awareness, they'd understand it, and there'd probably be better relationships amongst families and just the community itself.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
did.
I don't know about your parents. Women followed a certain role, and you really didn't have a choice. You followed that role. And then that
Right.
was projected onto your kids. And then
Yeah.
no different than what the fathers projected onto the kids.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
I'm just thinking, I think about our parents a lot and like what it took for them to like come over and what that journey was like and maybe the trauma that they sustained along the way as well, right?
I can't even
Right.
imagine. And they
Right.
were so young,
So,
Diana.
yeah, I think my mother left the house to go work for other families at the age of something like 10, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And she has 9 siblings, so there were 10 of them all together, and each child was responsible for going to do something different, right, supporting the family in one way or another. And some of the older siblings were married off, so it was her responsibility to go out and to make some money, that she would send back to her family, and that, she would give to her father to bring back to the family.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about, and I can't even imagine this, you know, just growing up in these homes. Like she was growing up while she was caring for someone else's family. Like she had to learn like things that young girls
Mhm.
learn at home, that their mothers have the opportunity to teach them as they're turning into young women. Like what are some of the things that are going to happen to your body, what are some of the things um, that you're going to need to be considering. Like all of those were learned through other people, through other families. So when you think about that, it's just it's it really is wild. And our
Mhm.
families came from, and Alina, correct me because I'm not as in tune with like exactly how your family was, but I know like they're country folk, right? So
Mhm.
they either were farmers or they worked in some small plants, but really country, very simple lives. And then they come to New York, and some of them had to figure out whether or not they were staying in New York or they went to Michigan in some situations. There was factory work out in Michigan. There were other types of opportunities here in New York. So they had to figure out very quickly where they wanted to stay. So thinking about all of that, and I look at my 17-year-old, and I'm going to get ready to send her off to college, and I already have one that's away, and I'm anxious about that. And I can't imagine someone so young to just be sent off to work, and the anxiety that probably caused my grandmother along the way, and how scared my mother was. Like those are things that of course sit with them. So then when they start to get these tangible items, they don't know how else to react. They never had things, right, their own, and
Right.
then these
Right.
things become so precious to them, and then you have to teach them that it's not the things that matter.
It's so hard to even. think about what they went through because the majority of them did come here when they were very young. Most of the women were married 16, 15. That
Yeah.
was
Back
average.
in
That
the
was
day, yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And even for our time, 18 was considered, it was a little bit later. 18 became somewhat, 17, 18 became the new norm.
That was the
Excuse
norm.
me.
Yeah. I got
Yeah.
married at 22 and I was considered old.
You were old.
Old.
I
They
was
told us that you
considered
were
old.
old, Luna.
I was like,
You
oh my
were
God,
old.
what?
I was like, damn, and she found a husband too? I was like,
Can you
And a
imagine?
single husband, actually. No, a single husband, not just a husband. Because when
That's
you're too old, it was only someone old. Maybe that was divorced or their wife died or something. That's who you were good for. Yeah.
exactly. But I'll
Oh,
never forget. This was a funny thing actually. When we got engaged, my husband had the party and we had people over and they asked, "Who is she and how old is she or whatever?" And he explained and he said 20. I actually got engaged at 20 and got married at 22. So when I got engaged at 20, somebody had the nerve to say to him, "Oh my God, she's so old."
I don't.
that probably was me, Lena.
It actually wasn't, but I know exactly who it was. But anyway, it
It
doesn't
doesn't matter. We're
matter.
all good.
Matter. But
Yeah.
my husband's reply was, "Yeah," because she said to him, "You couldn't find somebody younger." And my husband's reply was, "I wanted a wife, not someone to babysit, so I'm good." Like
You
what?
don't want to raise a kid. I remember the first time, and it took a while for my mother to tell me someone came to ask, for my hand in marriage. I was 14. My parents was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. There's nobody here for you, not at 14."
That's insane to me. Like like you said, for them it was normal back then, but then for us that grew up here, pretty much, we're like, what is wrong with these people? Like, how does I don't know.
And you
Uh,
realize the why, right? So
it's the why
I was
exactly.
married at 18, but like when you realize the why, like why did that happen back then? And I think part of it was they wanted to create the wife for their sons, right? Like
Hmm.
they wanted to mold and sculpt you before you were molded and sculpted and had an opinion and had,
That's right.
You
you
could
know,
be yourself. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
because really you're still young at that age and you're still there's still so
They can
much to
still kind of
learn.
brainwash you, right? Like,
I don't know that I go that far.
Not to that extreme. Come on.
sorry, had to say it.
Listen, we all couldn't be old ladies when we got married.
Thank you for being part of the show today. This was the first unscripted episode with guests, and we went back in time and we talked about the challenges of being first generation Albanian women growing up in America. The show had no set direction, and it went where it needed to go and found that many of the experiences are relatable. We discussed culture, tradition, the challenges, and what it was like and still is like as one is finding their authentic self while trying to maintain parts of an appreciated culture. Please join us next week for part 2 as Diana and Leana continue to share their experiences, their challenges, breaking unhealthy cycles, and what it's like raising second generation children.